Welcome to Truth Telling with Elizabeth D'Alto, the show dedicated to focusing on the truth that is always evolving within us and around us, where we explore the potentiality of truth as a highly esteemed value at a time in history when most people have more on their plates than any one human should. This podcast aims to cut through the noise, the ignorance, and the complexity of 21st century living by exploring the truths of a diverse range of incredible voices. From authors, artists, creatives, and educators to activists, speakers, and those in various scientific and esoteric fields, our guests hail from cultures and countries all over the world. On Mondays, we post interviews, and on Sundays, we post sermons, which are more personal and revolve around whatever I'm musing on that week. No episode of this show is meant for everyone, and every episode is meant for whoever needs it on the right day at the right time, and you never know when that might be for you. Not all guest views will reflect my own, and that's intentional. We don't learn, grow, heal, or improve by staying in our comfortable bubbles with all of our people who look, think, or live exactly how we do. In this show, you'll get the full range. Everything from health, communication, money, success, parenting, desire, and spirituality, to making pivots and transitions in life, and topics related to psychology, storytelling, gender and race issues, emotional intelligence, and sacred activism. We can learn a lot from each other, and we need each other. You can expect courageous conversations when you tune into the show that will range from insightful, uplifting, and illuminating to uncomfortable and sometimes even confrontational. But no matter what, they'll always be filled with compassion and curiosity. Each episode invites you, with a ton of love and respect, to listen with your heart and mind wide open. If you love what you hear or find it useful and inspiring, the best way to show your appreciation is to share the episode and subscribe. Thank you so much for listening, and now for today's show. This is episode number 233 of the Untame the Wild Soul podcast on overcoming narcissistic abuse and codependency. Today's guest, Lisa Romano, is an expert in helping people overcome faulty childhood programming that narcissistic abuse and codependency creates. We got all up in emotions, mindset, how you think about yourself if you've had either of these experiences, gaslighting, and other struggles this kind of dysfunction contributes to. Even if you haven't experienced either of these things, you might find this conversation useful, as we also cover things that impact almost everyone at some point. Attachment theory, developing a healthy sense of self, releasing unhealthy fears, how to communicate with narcissistic and codependent people in your life, and how other parenting dynamics impact children, especially before the age of 7. That part was really fascinating to me. This is one to listen to more than once, and definitely share with loved ones who you know are working through these things as well. The show notes for this episode can be found at untameyourself.com/T as in truth, T as in telling -233. That's untameyourself.com/TT-233. And one more thing, I'm so excited about this. Exactly 1 month from today, we will be releasing a tool that I've been working on for a couple of months now called the Trust Assessment. To find out exactly what that is and get on the wait list so you could be one of the first to take it, it's a free assessment. It's going to reveal so much to you about yourself and your life and how things are going. And there's some really useful information that comes as well once you take the assessment. There's a waitlist page, so head on over to wildsoulmovement.com/trust-waitlist. Again, that's wildsoulmovement.com/trust-waitlist. It's going to be amazing. I will continue to hype it up until March 5th rolls around because I'm so excited about it. And let's get into today's episode. Everybody, this is a very specific episode that I'm excited to explore with you, because over about the last year and a half or so, since we really started talking about emotional abuse, codependency, what happens in relationships with narcissistic people, I've gotten so many private messages from people, a lot of women even inside my programs and other programs that I'm affiliated with, like Terry Cole's Real Love Revolution. A lot of it specifically relates to having been raised by narcissistic parents. And so today we have Lisa Romano with us. She specializes in this. It's actually how I heard of her, which I already told you all that in the introduction. So Lisa, welcome. Thank you so much for being here.
Well, thank you so much for inviting me. This is exciting.
So to start out, I mean, the name of the show is Truth Telling with Elizabeth D'Alto. So I always love to ask, regardless of what we're going to get into, what's like a big truth that's really like impacting you in your life right now that you feel comfortable sharing, obviously?
A big truth. Well, one thing that I tend to fall back on, honestly, because I just think it's amazing, is that it's not us, it's our programming.
I love that.
Meaning that, it's just set me free because I understand that when I'm dealing with someone who is below the veil of consciousness, as I like to say, I don't have to take what they're saying personally.
Yeah.
And so being able to understand that people are just products of their environment, they've been downloaded to think a certain way, it's not their fault. And that truth has set me free. I don't have to take other people's stuff personally anymore. And it's just absolutely liberating. There's no more minutia.
Yeah, totally. So, I'm always curious about the origin story too. What got you into this work?
Well, I went into therapy when my marriage was falling apart. I had 3 small children and I was suffering from clinical depression and didn't know it. I was just always depressed and didn't know it. I always had anxiety. It was just a state of being. I didn't know anything else. My life was sucked and it always sucked. And I just thought that was normal. And it got to a point where my health was failing. And I was going to a couple of doctors and they were asking me to look at myself emotionally. I don't want to look at your rash. I want to know why you feel this way. Your body's listening to you. So you better listen to your body, that sort of thing. And I just decided, it's about time because I was at my wit's end. So I went to a therapist and that's when he did some history and he asked me if there's any alcoholism in your family. And I said, no, I don't drink. And he said, that's not what I asked you. I asked you if there's any alcoholism in your family. And I went, ooh, like he completely centered me. He was so grounded. And I was like, I'm this flighty little space cadet. And he just asked me a serious question. I did not answer it correctly. I need to hear what he's saying. And I said, well, actually, my grandparents on both sides are alcoholics. And my uncles on my mother's brothers are alcoholics. He says, so there's alcoholism in your family? I said, I guess so. And he said, did your parents ever go through any recovery? I said, no. They're perfect. There's nothing wrong with them. And he said, well, you've been raised by 2 unrecovered adult children of alcoholics, which is like being raised by alcoholics. And I said, wow. And he said, so I've got good news and bad news. The good news is you're not crazy, because I really felt crazy. But the bad news is you're severely codependent. And my experience with what I understood codependency was it had to do with being married to an alcoholic and I wasn't, or married to a drug addict and I wasn't. So I wasn't really quite sure how it fit, but I never turned back. I read everything I could about codependency. I read everything I could about child psychology, and the lessons started to fall into place. Like, my mother downloaded me to think like a codependent.
Yeah.
She enables my father. I enable my husband. She doesn't feel seen. She's looking for validation. That's exactly what I do. And oh my God, I have 3 little kids and I'm doing it to them. Sorry, that's what happened. I began to see myself in a way I had never seen myself before. And I knew that I had to get out of my marriage because he wasn't interested in getting better. So that's how I got started.
And how was that for you identity-wise? That I feel like that's kind of like, I call it a cosmic 2x4, and I don't think I made that up. I'm sure I heard it somewhere else. But to go, oh my God, because I don't know however old you were at the time, but I'm imagining at least a couple decades in being like, this thing was happening that's painted like literally every relationship, everything I've ever had, everything I've ever done. What was that like?
It was surreal. It was frightening. I remember feeling like, where have I been? How could I have been mimicking my mother's behavior? And I swore I never would.
Right.
And how could I have married someone like my father and my mother? And I swore I never would. How could I not see this? And that's when I began to understand I was unconscious, and that all of us are probably 95% unconscious. We're running off of what's been downloaded, and I didn't know it. And that scared the hell out of me. But I love my children so much that I knew I had to face it and figure it out. As terrifying and as shaky as I was really insecure because it meant I could trust nothing that I believed in. Mm. And I had to start from scratch. So I was very insecure. I was very raw. And I understood that the people that were in my life really couldn't be in my life anymore because they enjoyed hurting me. They enjoyed humiliating me. They enjoyed exploiting my vulnerabilities, including my own family. And life was just too fragile at that time for me to rebuild myself psychologically and emotionally from the inside out and take care of 3 little kids at the same time. Yeah. It was just too much. So,
and what was that? So this is great. Do you know who Bethany Webster is? She works around the mother wound. She was a great interview I did at the time we're recording this is still 2017. It'll be 2018 when it goes up. And this was really eye-opening for a lot. I received so many messages about that interview. And one of the biggest things that I'm kind of hearing coming through your story as well is that you had to really let some people go, even your family. And I mean, that goes against so many people's programming and conditioning, right? So I'd love to hear you just say a little bit more about that. If there's anything you could share on like what that process was like. And I know this is what you do. So by the way, y'all, like Lisa has programs for this. Definitely go check out her. She has 6 books. So there's a lot more where this came from, but we'll get the conversation started on the show the way we always do.
Mm-hmm. So it was really at that moment I realized that I was dealing with people who were unaware.
Yeah,
they didn't get it. It was like I looked around. I was like, they're all zombies, and I was a zombie too, and I don't want to be a zombie anymore. So it was like I had to make a decision because. Just historically, when I was in a bad place, they like to exploit it. My brother would get on my case. My parents would get on my case. I was always called names. I was, you're a drama queen. You make a big deal out of nothing. It's always about you. It really was. And I was really trying to get love, validation, and feel seen. And it just became a point where it was sink or swim. And I just had no energy left to give a crap about what these people thought. My children were my priority. And it really was me becoming a mama bear, like full on, like I have to correct what I did wrong for these kids because I'm there. My oldest was 11. I had done enough damage fighting with his father, trying to get his father to understand. His father was a covert narcissist. And I would explain myself to him and try to get him to understand what was wrong. And I was losing myself. I was so sick and I was ignoring the kids. Because I was trying to get their father up to speed with what was going on with them, what was going on with us. And he didn't want to hear it. He had no empathy for what was going on, so I lost myself. But having to let my parents go was terrifying because, like you said, it goes against everything. And we all have this tribal need to connect and this divine connection, especially to our mothers. And when we feel rejected by them, innately we keep going back for more, hoping that she'll see me. I'll finally figure it out. I'll finally be good enough. If I can't get her love, it's got to be me. Who does what? It's not natural for a mother to reject her child. You don't even see it that often in the wild.
Yeah.
Animals protect their young. They die for the young. So to feel like you've been sacrificed by your mother goes against everything. It turns you inside out. And it really, in my opinion, it's where eating disorders come from. It's where cutting comes from. It's where anxiety, you just begin to reject yourself because your mother, the person who created you, rejected you. So for me, it was really probably the hardest thing I've ever done was say, no more. You can't hurt me anymore. And it was terrifying. And I faced every fear that I ever worried about, I faced when I said no more with my mother. It was just incredible. But interesting enough, when I finally found the chutzpah to like tell my mother, I'm not 12 anymore. You don't get to talk to me like this anymore. Like I saw her as a woman. I didn't see her as my mom.
Yeah.
I saw her as this is a woman who's hurting me and she shouldn't be. And it's unacceptable. But when I was able to let her go, I was able to let go of my ex-husband. So it was like this trauma bond with her was the same. It was a mirror to the experience that I had with my ex-husband. And they were literally emotional twins. So I was trying to get from him what I could never get from her.
Oh, man.
I was able to face that terrifying wound and that attachment trauma It was in that moment I knew that I was going to have to take care of my own inner child. I was going to have to mother myself, see this abandoned little girl, and never abandon her again. And I've never looked back. I don't abandon myself anymore.
I love that. Also, congratulations. It's so much work. And so you mentioned you faced every fear. What were some of those fears? Because I know there are people listening like, oh my God, probably feeling constricted in the chest. Maybe they want to turn it off. I turn it off if you need to, but come back, people listening. If this is you and you're like, God, it just sounds so much like me. I don't want to hear what Shivan's going to say because I know it's going to be hard. So what specifically were some of those fears?
Well, when you're a little girl or a little boy and you don't ever feel like you're connected with your mom and you feel rejected, then children always assume it's their fault. Mm. And so along with feeling like it's my fault comes the narrative. This 3-year-old psyche's got to come up with a story that matches it's my fault. And the fault is I'm not good enough. So she doesn't want me. I'm not good enough. I'm just not good enough. I'm innately flawed. I'm unworthy. And that was what I was afraid of. Yeah. I was afraid that if I let her go, I was letting go of the fantasy that this person who was God to me was going to finally one day say to me, Lisa, you're good enough and I love you. You're all right. You're a good kid. I was letting that dream and that fantasy go.
Oh, interesting.
It was never going to happen. I was never going to bond with this woman and this creature that I love so much. And that is every child's fear, this attachment trauma.
I'm curious, when you say I loved so much, was it actually love? Or was it, because I feel like almost, and you would probably be able to be more technical about this than I can, but what I've realized after unpacking my own is like codependent love is, it's kind of a context for love, but it's not like, we'll just say real love in quotation marks. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I get what you're saying. But when we're talking about a child and their parent,
yeah,
that is supposed to be an unconditional love.
Got it.
It's supposed to be a supreme type of love. Mm. When a child thinks about their mother, even when the child messes up, the child is supposed to feel like maybe mom didn't like my behavior, but she loves me.
Right.
It is it's a sense of acceptance. It's a sense of validation. It's a sense of you are enough and you are worthy. And if children get that, if they feel psychologically seen by the time they're 2 or 3, they can go into kindergarten and they can feel pretty secure about themselves, because mom and dad have done a good enough job making them feel like their feelings matter, like they're valid. But when you're void of that, you're full of insecurities, you don't think your feelings matter, you don't know how to validate yourself, you're always looking outside of yourself to get that validation. That's where, the codependent love, I understand what you're saying.
Yeah.
I was a codependent love addict until I figured this out. Yeah. But I loved my mother as a child, like every child loves. It's like Stockholm syndrome. Children love their abusers. We come into this world naturally connected to these people who have created us. It's natural.
Yeah.
It's supposed to be returned, but in many of the cases, it's not.
Yeah.
It's not.
So I'm curious. We've talked a lot about a mother. Is there, do you notice if there is a difference between when the mother is a narcissist or codependent or whatever it is, or if it's the father, how that impacts? And then I'm also wondering if the impact is different for a daughter or a son or a person who doesn't identify with either, but at birth is right. The sign.
It's interesting. I think what I've noticed is that when it's the same sex parent, so in other words, when it's a mother that rejects the daughter ends up rejecting herself. Mm. And when I notice when the father rejects the son, we can, what I see in my coaching practice is that the men become codependent, very much people pleasers, trying to gain validation, and they also reject themselves. It's very interesting. And I've noticed that men who have narcissistic mothers, I really can't say it's black and white. I've seen it run the gamut. Okay. Where I've seen like men who have been abused by a narcissistic mother, then hold on to themselves in a relationship and they're unable to be giving. So they play out that aggression. I'm not going to give you my love. So it's this power play that they have between females. I noticed that too, And then there are some females who have been narcissistically abused by their fathers, and they hold on to themselves, and they're the love avoidant, and they refuse to give the man the validation perhaps that he seeks. So I've really seen.
It can go either way. I was just curious. Yeah. It was just something I was wondering. And so I know a lot of what you talk about is how this programming then makes a person feel about themselves and how it plays out. So I noticed, and you've mentioned the term attachment a few times. I've begun reading the book Attached, but I've never finished through it. So, and I'm a little bit familiar with attachment theory, but so it sounds like that's part of your work. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So basically what this is the crux of it. Basically that if you're born to people who can't see you, then you cannot attach in a healthy way. Children are born attached to their mother with an umbilical cord, right? So they're being completely divinely protected and taken care of and nurtured through this umbilical cord experience. They literally enter this world attached to their mother. And I feel when this umbilical cord gets cut, another attachment, invisible bond must take place. Yeah. And children are supposed to feel, parents are supposed to attune themselves to the child. Parents are supposed to be picking up on the cues of the child. But when the child is neglected, they're forced to pick up on the cues of the parents. And then that's how they lose themselves. So it's not about what Johnny thinks about Johnny. It's Johnny's got to worry about what mommy thinks. And Johnny's got to worry about what daddy thinks. And so to feel safe, I have to worry about what's happening outside of me. And then what happens is this experience of self is lost. I have no grounding. And that becomes your programming over and over. You're programmed to dissociate from the self so that you can manage what's happening in your house. Yeah. You're living in survival. And we're always seeking that validation and that connection. It's innate. It's a psychological, we come here to bond.
Yeah.
And when we can't, that gets frustrated. And then, so we give up eventually around 12. We stop trying to bond with our parents and we start bonding with, sexual partners. Or we start looking for validation in all the wrong places because we never received the validation, the acceptance that we needed as children. And that becomes part of our program. We're all unconscious. Children a lot of people don't know this, but children are in a theta brainwave state until they're about 7 years old, which
is I didn't know that.
Yeah, hypnotic brainwave state. All children are in a hypnotic brainwave state until the age of about 7. So that means that whatever's happening in their experience, imagine being hypnotized. And that's so that children can download a lot of data before the age of 7. So there's a lot of stuff a kid has to know before the age of 7.
So does that, if there are traumatic events or something, can that interrupt that state, or they literally stay in the state?
No, they stay in. Oh, sure. Traumatic event becomes part of the download. So whatever they're thinking at the time, right? So think about a poor kid who's sexually abused at 5. They have to think about a 5-year-old psyche. Think about grandpa saying, you like this. You're supposed to make grandpa happy. Don't tell anybody. This is our secret. This becomes part of, I can't tell. People are allowed to abuse me. This all becomes part of what's been downloaded. And this happens over and over. So anything that gets downloaded before the age of 7, if it's not confronted later on in life, it will perpetuate.
Yeah. Yeah. We talk about this a lot, the repeating realities or the imprints of the unhealthy imprints, blueprints, or everyone kind of has there's probably official terms for it, but guests we've had on the show have had their own terms for it. And then the things keep coming back up, like you said, right? People will go, what's wrong with me? Same guy, same situation, or same experience, but it keeps coming back up so you can heal.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so you can heal. I think but I also think it comes up because that's just the nature of the universe. The universe is holographic. And so, there's no big conspiracy. Yeah. There's just, the nature of reality is holographic. I coached 2 little girls last night, 12 and 15. I'm trying to explain to them that, for whatever reason, dear ones, this is your opportunity to break this cycle between mom and dad. A lot of dysfunction, but you can break this cycle. And if they don't, there's this holographic issue that we all have going. We all recreate what's been downloaded. It's just the nature of reality. And it's hard for people to believe that, but it's really true.
Yeah, 100%. So can we talk a little bit more about the deprogramming process? Because I really geek out on this. And I know I have my variety of ways that people on the show are super familiar with my stuff. So I'd love to hear, how does that work? Unpacking things, getting rid of the old programming, uploading basically an entire new operating system. It's daunting.
Absolutely. It really is. And that's why I create programs to do it. And that's why I write books to do it, because it's repetition, observation, and consistency. Yeah. When I was creating my program, my first program, what I did was it was like reverse engineering. Yeah. I figured out, how did I get brainwashed in the first place? And then I compared a healthy home versus an unhealthy home. And I began to understand, children from healthy homes feel seen. I never felt seen. Children from healthy homes are allowed to express their emotions. I never had that. It's okay to be angry in an unhealthy home. You're taught life skills. It's okay to make a mistake. Parents are supposed to be inquisitive about your day. How do you feel? What do you think? What happened today? So I began to understand what was missing. And then I understood that I had to give that to myself. That was part of my reprogramming process, And then I also studied the art of learning. Children learn through repetition, observation, and consistency. We learn through repetition, observation, and consistency. If I want a new program, it's got to be repetition, observation, and consistency. So in my program, I have videos. That's one way of learning. I have the meditations. That's another layer of learning. There's the journaling, mapping the brain. Their contribution to Facebook, live streams, and, what happens inside the forum is all repetition, observation, and consistency. So a central message repeated over and over and over and over and over in many, many different ways, and clients are taught, this is the way you reprogram.
Yeah.
We have to figure out what's wrong first. You have to figure out what's wrong first. You can't fix a hole in the wall you can't see.
Right.
I am really big about, okay, you feel this way. Let's figure out why. Let's figure out the thought process that created that. And then let's see what we can do about reprogramming that thought, because it's a lie. You are good enough. Yeah. You are good enough.
So for people, I imagine it is probably pretty painful to realize when someone has taken this in and they have done it to their own children.
Mm-hmm.
How do you help people not just like completely crumble under guilt, shame, all that stuff that they might feel if they realize that?
Mm-hmm. Well, it's tough. That's, my breakthrough coach program. It's the awakening phase, the accountability phase, and then the ascension phase. So we're talking about, I don't hit them with that till like module 2.
Yeah.
And the first 4 modules, and I always tell them, you have to focus on what happened to you first. We have to pin the tail on the donkey.
Yeah.
Before you can have empathy for your children and be able to stand there, and take it, you have to understand that it's not your fault, that you were programmed to believe and to act and think that you're not enough. That's not your fault. So there's 4 weeks of healing the shame. There's 4 weeks of just focusing and helping them understand what happened to them first.
This is amazing. I geek out on synchronicity. And I also feel like that's how life goes. Hey, this is really important. A couple of days ago, I record these Sunday sermons, and this one, we're having this conversation in December. Your interview will be up, I think, in February. But I literally recorded this like 3 days ago, where I just was able to articulate that before I could get to the place of deep compassion for my abuser, I had to get to the bottom of my own hurt and my own pain. And it was, so thank you for, wasn't looking for the validation, but thank you for validating that wasn't just my experience, right? That is actually how it has to go. Is that correct?
Absolutely.
Cool.
We have to, because what happens when we're growing up, especially if you come from a dysfunctional home, what happens is, Mary falls off the bike. Her knee is gushing with blood. And dad says, "You're all right." Nothing wrong with you. That doesn't hurt. Her experience gets completely invalidated. There's pain there. Not only does she physically hurt, but her father has just invalidated her and abandoned her. This sounds melodramatic, but when you're 3 or 4 or 5 years old and your knee is busted open and daddy's saying, hey, you're a big girl. Don't worry about it. That doesn't hurt. There's this, what do I do with that pain? So I call it ice skating. So there's this valley of pain. And what we've done is we've taught children to ice skate over the pain. So they never quite touch it. They never quite know how to like sink into it and actually feel it and experience it. And if you can't experience it, if you can't validate it, you can't release it.
Right.
You can't release it. And so what I do is I teach clients, now this is interesting. The brain is designed to avoid pain. The brain is not designed for healing. You are a warrior if you take the time to heal, because your brain is going to kick and scream and do everything it can to avoid pain and seek pleasure. It does not want to go there. That's what drinking's about. That's what sex is about. That's what, bulimia is about.
Netflix.
Whatever.
Yeah.
Whatever. The brain is not designed to go into that lonely, dark space where little children have learned to believe that they're not good enough. The brain is designed to be codependent and be good enough so that someone will say that I'm good enough so I don't have to go there.
Yeah. I want to repeat something you just said. You and everyone listening, I really want you to hear this, because I know there's so many women who are on their healing path. They've chosen the path of growth in this life. And obviously we have men and women listening, but it's mostly women. And you said you are a warrior if you have chosen to do this, because I know it gets so hard sometimes. I know from my own experience, and I know because I work with you and I know so many of you who listen, it is not easy. And every day that you show up to do this again and more, whether you have kids or not, right? Whether you're doing it for the benefit of another or really just doing it for yourself, which we all have other people in our lives. We're never just doing something entirely for ourselves. You are a freaking warrior. Thank you so much for saying that.
Absolutely. Because like I said, the brain is really designed to avoid pain.
Yeah.
And so to really heal, what we're asking people to do is to go into that inner child's experience and to experience all the pain that this inner child was brainwashed to believe was invalid.
Yeah. So I'm curious, because to me, that sounds like gaslighting. Unintentional. I feel like there's like you said earlier, I think your ex-husband was covert narcissist. I feel like there's covert and overt for everything, right? Narcissism, gaslighting, like when people have downloaded the behavior, they're just doing it. They don't know they're doing it. They certainly wouldn't choose to, probably, if they consciously knew what they were doing.
Right.
Is that something you could speak to? Could you be clear about what the definition of gaslighting is? Because I feel like it actually gets tossed around very irresponsibly these days. Basically, anyone who doesn't like what someone's saying to them, they're like, that's gaslighting. And that's not correct.
Right. Gaslighting is when you intend to cause the person emotional duress. That's your intention, is to mess with their head, make them doubt themselves, to intentionally minimize them. There's an intention behind it.
So covert covert gaslighting is actually not a thing then?
I don't know if people are describing it correctly. Covert gaslighting can be considered covert. You understand?
Let me make sure I understand. So what I was thinking to be covert gaslighting is when someone's doing it, they don't know what they're doing it. What I think I'm hearing you say is it's actually when the intention is still there, but it's not as like aggressive. So for example, I think of what's the movie with Julia Roberts, Sleeping with the Enemy, right? Wasn't he like changing the clocks on her? Like that's like really, really overt gaslighting. Yes. I'm intentionally trying to mess with you, but just questioning someone's experience, invalidating. So maybe this is it. And so correct me wherever I'm making a mistake or not making the appropriate thing. I think a lot of people are just calling someone invalidating their experience gaslighting.
Right. That's not the same thing.
Got it. So can you help us really make sure we know the difference?
So if someone says, if two friends are saying, I really don't like that job. I think my boss is just too much. And I think she's picking on me. And the friend says, well, I don't see it that way. She treats everybody that way.
Mm-hmm.
She could have, the person complaining could have absolutely felt invalidated, but that's not gaslighting. That's the friend trying to actually give you a different spin on it,
Yeah.
like maybe there's another way to look at this, So I do think that the word narcissism, NPD, there's criteria to be NPD,
Yeah.
So I think a lot of people, but I do believe that there are a lot of people who have narcissistic traits.
Yeah. Yeah. Like a spectrum, right? Like there are some
Yeah.
people who are like full out, you could diagnose it. And then there's just a spectrum where they have tendencies or they don't.
Yeah, everybody can be self-absorbed.
Yeah.
Everybody can be so hurt that they think that you don't understand them. Everybody could be headstrong. Everybody could want to fulfill a dream and like not let anybody get in the way. I think narcissism for me, what I look for when I'm talking to somebody is, does this person have the ability to have empathy for other people?
Mm-hmm.
When there's a lack of empathy for other people, to me, that's a telltale sign. When you're listening to someone and they have no empathy for someone who's in pain, or they're always brushing people off. There's this attitude, this arrogance. They're annoyed by people who have emotions. They're above you and they're beneath you. It's not just being self-absorbed. There's a quality of, I have absolutely not a care in the world for your experience.
Got it.
No empathy for you.
Yeah. So cool. I'm seeing this. I'm even seeing this in my own experience. And I've always been very careful when I describe my relationship that I was with a very narcissistic person, but that person was certainly capable of empathy. Do I think they were performing empathy sometimes and not actually feeling it? Yeah. Because I think we have access to so much information now. So I think sometimes when people are really smart or really intelligent, they can say and do the things that they know they're supposed to say and do, but it's more just like kind of performing it than actually feeling it, but still has the same impact.
Yeah, it's really tough these days because, like you said, there is so much information. And then what do you do if a girl just isn't, a girl meets a guy and she's not into him,
Yeah.
and she doesn't want to call him anymore. Is she a narcissist?
Right.
If she says, I'm sorry, it's not going to go anywhere, is she a narcissist because she has boundaries and please don't call me anymore? Yeah. And you keep texting her and she's not calling you back? Is she giving you the cold shoulder? Is she discarding you? No, she's just not into you.
Yeah.
We've got to really, really be more responsible for, how we're showing up and what we're defining, other people as.
Yeah. I appreciate this. Responsible how we are showing up and defining, because I even know, like, online, right? So there's a lot of information, which means there's also a lot of misinformation. And I actually, a friend of mine who actually, she's in the community, she might even be listening to this, had written a post for Elephant Journal that said, narcissists are people too. And so like they are just as worthy and deserving of our compassion and all these things. And this is one of the things that she talked about. She's like, a lot of people are out there thinking, Googling what's a narcissist, and there's all these posts written by people who are not psychologists, who are not therapists, these are not necessarily textbooks definitions. And then it's like that game of telephone, right? You start here with like what something actually means, and then by the time it's been passed through a dozen people or this blog or that blog and everyone's interpreted on their own, what comes out on the other side might not actually be accurate.
See, someone who is a narcissist, they are a person too, but they have the ability to steamroll you. They have the ability to annihilate you. If you go up against a true narcissist and you confront them, what you think is if you confront them with, he sleeps with your girlfriend, you confront him. A true narcissist is going to be very angry, and he is going to do everything he can to make you think that either it never happened or it's okay that it happened. And if it happened, you have no right to have any feelings about it.
Right.
So while they are people too, you have to be very, very careful. I don't say throw narcissists off the bridge. I say let them go in love and light. I say acknowledge that there's a very pained person there. They're coming from a very wounded place.
Yeah.
They're very insecure, and they don't want to go to that pain place either. Their brain is designed to avoid that pain.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean you have to have them over for dinner.
Right. So this is something I really wanted to ask you. people, I know you were able to divorce your ex-husband, but you share children.
Mm-hmm.
And I know, some people have inextricable
Mm-hmm.
relationships with narcissists.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm curious about, how do you communicate with someone? How do you deal with the pride, right? We all have that need to be right sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
What does that look like when you actually can't, if that's the case, remove someone from your life? Or do you believe that literally you can remove anyone from your life?
I think when there are children, and the courts are involved, the court looked me right in the face and said, they're his children too.
Mm-hmm.
And it's none of your business where he takes them. It's none of your business who he's with when he takes them, when he has them for visitation. I mean, it was just like, they kicked my ass. I was like, whoosh. Here I am trying to explain to them that he uses them as a pawn, and he can be verbally abusive. And they told me, too bad. There's nothing you can do about it. And I was like, what? So that was really hard. Talk about humbling.
Yeah.
And I think that this doesn't happen in one giant step. This is an evolution. And every relationship is different. Every partnership is different. So there isn't a black and white answer to that. For me, what I did was I got extremely schooled about codependency and my own issues and my need to try to control other people. I got very, very clear about my thinking that he should be this way with them.
Mm-hmm.
And I had to let that go. And my therapist was brilliant. He said, as tough as this is, their relationship with their father is none of your business. And I was like,
wow.
What? I was in the middle of everything. I was the buffer between the two of them. And what was terrifying, and so many people I'm sure can relate to this, is when you divorce someone who's covert, or you divorce someone that is a full-blown narcissist and you have kids, it's terrifying. And that's why so many people stay married. Because when you get divorced, you can't buffer between them and their father or the mother anymore. You can't. They are going to spend time with that narcissist. They will sleep over that narcissist's house. You are not there to hear what they're saying. When you're married, you can say, "Oh, that your dad didn't mean that," or "Oh, maybe you should have said that." You can buffer, but it's terrible. It's just so awful. And for me, it happened in stages. And I just knew I had to grow up. I knew that I could not try to control him anymore. I knew I had to listen to what the court said, and I feel like the whole experience really forced me to grow up and become a woman, understand what I could control, what I couldn't control. There was a lot of damage control. And, I dedicated myself to my kids. I knew that there was going to be a lot of misunderstandings, a lot of pain, and I had to stay strong. So when they came back from daddy's, I could deal with what was happening. If he didn't want to pick them up, I used to say, listen, court said you have to pick them up. You're supposed to pick them up Sunday at 12. And if he didn't pick them up, I was at 1 o'clock. I was like, where are you? These kids are waiting, and I get into an argument with him. And then finally I said, he's got 15 minutes. He's not here by 12:15 or whatever it is. I'm taking these kids to fly kites. I'm taking them bowling. I'm taking them out. So what I'm saying is I learned to negotiate each situation as it came up. But the agenda was peace. The agenda was not to fight. The agenda was to accept what I could not control and then to control what I could.
I love that.
And even today, it's the same thing with him.
Yeah. And then, so, all right, having all the knowledge you have and then seeing how it's impacting them. I mean, did you make them go to therapy? Again, it's because what you just said, control what I can, surrender, accept what I can't. So how did you try to navigate what you knew they were experiencing because you had just unpacked it yourself, or probably still were?
Well, my children refused to go to therapy, and so that was really, really difficult. And so I did the best that I could. When they came home, I didn't put him down. I just tried to explain to him, well, his mother and his father, and this is what codependency looks like. And it's really not your responsibility to take care of mommy's feelings or daddy's feelings. It's our job to take care of you. I'm really sorry that daddy put that on you. I'm really sorry daddy talked about mommy to you. And I was very very, very, I was careful, but I was very clear and I didn't harp on it.
Cool.
it was like, wow, I really wish Daddy didn't say that, because it's not fair that you have to listen to that. So what do you want for dinner?
That's great. And I love, have you ever read the book, The Truth by Neil Strauss?
No.
I read this a couple years ago, almost 2 years ago right now. And this is what kind of started opening my eyes to some of the deeper dysfunction that I grew up with that I didn't realize. Because a lot of codependency in my family, no narcissists, but a lot of codependency for sure. And one of the big, big, big things I took out of that was how detrimental it is when the parents talk badly about each other to the child.
Yeah, because the child is being forced in that situation to ignore their experiences. Yeah. So the child loves both mother and father. So when a mother is talking badly about the father, she's giving the child a choice. She's actually saying, who are you going to choose in this moment? Mm-hmm. All children want to be accepted by mother. And so when mother is talking poorly about dad, the child is put in such a difficult emotional position, because if she says, or he says, stop, that's my dad, she or he risks losing the attachment to mom or the validation from mom. And so the child is forced to just stand there and take it, and to worry about mom's feelings. And so this is the crux of codependency, when children are forced through the dynamics in the home to worry about the other people, and the adults and the caretakers are not sending the message that we are here to worry about you.
Yeah.
You're not here to worry about us. It's our job to take care of you. And so many parents don't realize that they're, even in checking in the homework, moms are saying, do it over because it's about the mom.
Yeah.
I don't want you to go to school and show the teacher that mess. What is she going to think about me?
Yeah.
Do it over. We do it all the time.
This is so funny. As you're saying this, there's like a really weird thing that I'm connecting, and maybe some people listening can relate to it. But I grew up, my parents are both really clean. Like they keep the house clean, like pristine condition, right? And somehow me and my brother too is I lean on the side of messy. Like I have to really try to like keep my house clean. And it's always been interesting to me, like, how could I have not, like, picked up on, like, being able to just friggin' keep the house clean? And it's because that it was never, like, about me or for me, It was about, you got to keep it clean. People are coming over. And that's the thing, like, people are coming over. You got to clean it, Oh, but then they like to clean for us, too. But that's just I'm just making the connection in my brain that, like, my rebellion against keeping the house clean was because, like, I didn't care because it wasn't, like, about me or for me as a little kid. I resented that shit.
See, that's the whole thing. I was going to ask you, well, how did you feel when you're watching mom and dad clean and they're saying to you, clean up, because you got to go back to that moment.
Yeah. Yeah.
How
That's funny.
did you feel? And so now there's cognitive dissonance associated with keeping the house clean, because there's a part of you is like, I don't really think I want to,
Yeah, 100%. This actually makes me miserable. There's nothing I'd rather do less.
You could figure it out.
Yeah.
So there's cognitive dissonance. Do I want a house clean? Well, I do, but there's this dissonance towards cleaning it or feeling like I have to clean it.
Feeling like I have to. Yeah.
Yeah. So people don't like to feel like they have to do anything.
No. People
have to feel, it's what sharing. Parents make this, share with your sister. That's not sharing. That's you're coercing the child. You're guilting the child. It's manipulation. You're terrifying the child. That's not sharing.
Yeah.
That's when you turn your back, the older one bites the little one.
Yeah.
Because you force this kid to resent having to share. Mm. So we have to teach children that we have to respect that not even children like to feel like they have to do something. A smart parent figures out a way to get the kid on board.
Yeah.
Get the kid on board. Don't give the kid $20 because he got an A, because that's about you. Make the kid feel good about studying and the work that he or she put into to get the A. You did such a good job. You did such a good job. Good for you. How does it feel to have an A? Must feel good. You deserve that A.
Cool. That's really useful. This stuff is so fascinating. I feel like I could geek out on it forever. So I don't know. Oh, the way people see themselves in the world, how they navigate social situations when they have been raised by a narcissistic or a codependent, do they always go hand in hand? If someone's a narcissist, are they usually also codependent? Are there cases when one does not go with the other?
In terms of, there are some people, I don't know if I agree with it, but I've heard some people say that a codependent will always attract a narcissist. That's not been in my experience.
I did see an article that literally said that narcissists and, oh, no, it wasn't codependents. It was narcissists and empaths. The title was literally that narcissists and empaths go together like peas and carrots. Sorry, keep going.
But I do think that you can be a codependent. Two codependents can attract one another, and then what happens is one is more the pursuer, and then one is more the avoidant.
Yeah.
And then what happens is when the pursuer gets sick of chasing the avoidant, right, and she starts to pull back, or he starts like, I'm not chasing you anymore. Fine, you want to ignore me, and all of a sudden the avoidant one begins to start chasing one that's pursuing, and the minute the pursuer, the original pursuer, feels back in her comfort zone or his comfort zone, and she starts chasing for emotion and attention and connection, the avoidant begins to pull back again. And so many relationships are going through this right now, this back and this forth, where there's, I want to talk to you, I want to connect to you, and the person you're trying to connect to doesn't want to.
Yeah.
You're chasing them. Doesn't mean he's a narcissist or she's a narcissist. They're avoidant. They're a codependent that's avoiding, having to be vulnerable. It's scary when you're a codependent to be vulnerable because you don't think you're good enough.
Right. So I went on a tangent. I want to come back to, how do people think about themselves when they have been raised by a narcissistic parent?
You don't feel like you're good enough. You feel unworthy. You feel like you have no right to your feelings. You don't even know how to. You're numb, and lots of times you're numb because you've been so invalidated, and your experience has always been to take care of the mood swings of a narcissistic parent, or to, children will contort themselves in a variety of ways just to keep mommy and daddy calm. So they could, be starving, but they won't say I'm hungry because their experience is, when they're hungry, that upsets mommy because mommy's on the phone, or mommy's doing something else, or mommy's watching TV, or mommy's on the computer,
Yeah.
So children will learn to suppress their needs. They live in survival. And as adults, they don't feel like they have value. They don't know why, but they don't feel like they have value. They doubt that they'll ever, they really do doubt. I did a survey of over 1,000 people from 200 different countries. 98% of them said they doubt that they're worthy of love.
Wow.
And it was like 86 or close to 90% felt invisible. That when they were out in the world, like they did not feel like they had a right to be part of whatever the world was. They were separate of it. And that's the disconnect that we're talking about. So their psychological perception of self is that I'm separate from everything. I'm alone from everything. And I think that speaks to their emotional experience of not being able to connect to a person who's impossible to connect to.
Yeah.
Then they're self-alienated. They're disconnected from the self. They don't know what they think. They don't know what they feel. They don't know what they want. They live as extensions to other people. They'll get through the day. They'll have a job and they'll have a career. But if the job sucks and it's not a good fit, they might stay at it anyway. They don't think that they have a right to say, let me go for my dreams.
Yeah.
They'll tolerate it.
Right. Probably so much high tolerance for so many unacceptable things. Yeah.
High tolerance for pain. High tolerance for pain. And they don't know how to check in with self because no one checked in with them. Everything's a mirror. So if parents aren't checking in with Mary and Johnny, how do you feel? What do you think? The child's psyche does not know to check in with self.
Yeah. It's so funny. I'm sure, I imagine people listening are probably, maybe you are, maybe you aren't doing what I'm doing. I'm literally like flipping through a Rolodex of everyone in my family going, oh, yep, that one does that. Nope, that one's good.
Yeah.
As well as times and places where I've done similar things.
Right. Well, that's great. You have a sense of humility, and that's important because, I just did a Facebook post yesterday. If you can't see yourself, you can't free yourself.
Oh, God. I'm so glad so many of these really true things rhyme so we could all remember them.
Yes, if you can't see yourself, you can't free yourself.
I love that. If you can't see yourself, you
You
can't free
cannot.
yourself.
And that's why narcissists will always stay stuck, because they don't want to see themselves. They can't see themselves. A codependent is in so much pain, and they're aware that they're in pain in most cases.
Yeah.
They can be awakened to, okay, and they want to know. A codependent's like, the clients that come through my class, they're desperate. They've been in therapy 10, 20, 30 years, and it's not working. They don't have the life skills, and they don't know where the linchpins are. So when they come to me, they're like, I want to know what I'm doing wrong so I can fix this. You won't get that from a narcissist.
Yeah. So I have one last question for you then. So I am curious about this. This is not to knock therapy at all. In the last year, I have had more of an experience with therapy than I had before. It was super useful.
Awesome.
Why does therapy fall short so often though? Because this is just something I hear a lot. People who have been in therapy for so long. I'll have clients come to me, say I've had enough therapy to put my children through college, and I'm still struggling essentially with the same stuff. So how is it that people like you and I are able to get people to a place that the therapy didn't?
I have my own theories on it. A couple of things that I'd like to say is that, I can tell you, again, I go back to what works versus what doesn't work, right? So back to when I was creating my programs, what's a healthy home and what's an unhealthy home. So I was always trying to draw parallels, figure it out, right? So when people come to me and I'm coaching with them, I validate them.
Yeah.
I see them. I've had clients tell me that they've gone into therapy and the therapist has said, I can't deal with you until you go home and deal with your anger.
Interesting.
Go home and deal with your anger, and then we could talk about, you and your husband getting back on the right track. My client's pissed off that her husband is a serial cheater. She has a right to be angry. And it's your job to help her understand her anger is valid, and to help her husband understand what his actions are doing to the trust in the relationship. And we can work from there. I think that I'm not so sure psychiatrists, psychologists, and therapists validate a client as much as could be done. I was very fortunate. My therapist, he said to me, you're not crazy, but you're codependent, and you're depressed because you're codependent. That way I felt seen, but I had something to hold on to. I also teach people about how the brain works.
Yeah.
I teach people about oh, that's why I felt that way. We go to therapy, we talk about how we feel, not about why we feel that way.
Interesting. And and again, I'm sure there's different types of therapy. So some people probably do that and some people probably don't. Yeah.
It's true. I would say so. I would say so.
Yeah. I'm always so fascinated. I've asked some other people about that. Like, why is it that but I guess that's also it too. Like in any profession, there are people who are like excellent at a thing and people who aren't.
I had a great therapist, a great psychotherapist,
Yeah.
And, but if you're going to ask me why I think what you do works, or why I think what I might do that works, I think that there's a lot of teaching that goes on.
Yeah.
So when someone's talking about anxiety, we're exploring what it feels like to be anxious, and we're exploring the root causes of anxiety. We're not just saying, oh, you have anxiety, and claiming it.
Right.
And medicating it,
Right.
Although sometimes that's absolutely necessary.
Yeah.
I've been on medication myself for a short time. I see value in that too.
Yeah.
So, but like you said, there are good doctors, there are good mechanics, and there are bad doctors and bad mechanics.
Yeah.
We can't say all therapy sucks. That's just not the case.
No. So is there anything in this whole scope of our conversation, which has revolved around pretty much a couple of main themes, is there anything I didn't ask you? Like, you feel like anything we missed or anything we're leaving out that is like important to complete the conversation?
I would just, my main message is that you are enough. You are innately enough. And if you don't believe you are, that's because someone made you feel that way. It might not have been intentional. It's also important to understand that what happens to us in childhood affects us as adults.
Yeah. Like, without a doubt, right? Like, there's no way around that. That's true for like every human.
In my opinion.
Yeah.
In my opinion, you could have something that happened to you when you were 2, a spider crawls on your leg while you're in the crib and you have no conscious memory of it, but you're 30, 40 years old and you hate spiders. You don't know why.
Right.
So yeah. And so I always say it's not you, it's your programming.
Yeah, I love that.
And if you're struggling with self-esteem or you don't feel like you're good enough, there's a reason. So don't get stuck in thinking you're not good enough. Go deeper. Why do I feel that way? Who made me feel that way? And then you'll realize that below that is this innate divine human being that was always enough. But childhood experiences and what they experienced from the outside made them feel like they weren't good enough.
Yeah.
So deeper.
And I love to hear you say someone made you feel that way, because this is something I have taken on. There's some dodgy self-help and spirituality teachings out there, or things that get misinterpreted. And one of the things I definitely misinterpreted and went ahead and propagated myself at one point or another is that no one can make you feel anything. I think it's because there's this Eleanor Roosevelt quote that says, no one can make you feel inferior without your own consent. But it's like, well, if it was uploaded into you when you were 3 years old, like it actually someone had to make you feel that way before you could continue to feel that way.
So what happens is when we're children is we're powerless, right?
Yeah.
And we are very egocentric. And the world does revolve around us. We don't understand the stars and the moon, the cosmos. It's like whatever's happening in that playpen or that living room or that kitchen, that's it.
Yeah.
So if I am not good enough to get my mother's validation, or if she's screaming or she's hitting me or just ignoring me, right? Then I will assume as a child, it's me.
Yeah.
That's why. So your parents do make you feel a certain way. And that's because innately the brain knows, the amygdala is set. The amygdala knows it's supposed to be warm, safe, and feel connected and bonded to. And when that does not happen, we know what happens in the Romanian orphanages. These children do not thrive. Mm-hmm. When they don't receive basic human tactile stimulation, when oxytocin is not forming through their brain, and oxytocin flows through the brain when a bonding is taking place from another human being. When the brain is denied these chemicals, there are consequences. So people can make you feel like you're unworthy. Then as an adult, you're triggered to remember that.
Right. Yeah. Oh my God. Thank you, Lisa. Thank you so much. Thank you for sharing so much of your own experience, your teachings. People listening, if you want to know more about Lisa's programs, check out her books. If you really relate to this, as always, if you're feeling really triggered or tender or emotional, like do not do that on your own over there. Like send one of us an email. Definitely reach out if you need something. I always like to say that where especially the topics are very tender and sensitive and intense, like this can be. So definitely reach out if you need something. Lisa's website is Lisa A. Romano, Romano. And we'll put it all in the show notes. We'll get that up there. So this was amazing. I really appreciate it. And as well, I just want to remind everyone, I know I said it in the introduction, but I'll say it again. How I even connected with Lisa is a very close friend of mine was doing one of her programs. And this is a person who had done a lot of work on themselves already. And they were like, this is changing everything. So very, very, very highly endorsed. So Lisa, thank you again.
Thank you. And thank you for doing what you do.
Absolutely. We'll see you later.
Shining light in the world. Bye now. Bye.
One of the easiest ways to keep somebody shut down is to tell them they're not allowed to speak, to take their voice away. And as people who present in the feminine in the world, people who have presented as women in the past, I'll use that group, although it's happened for many, many, many groups, and it's still happening for many, many, many groups. The easiest way to take away our power is to take away our voice. So that's why we weren't allowed to vote. That's why we weren't allowed to work, that we were property. Sound familiar for a lot of POC women and men? It's all the same. Anytime that we want to oppress any group of people, we take away their voice.